keep on fighting and we never look back. Here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne.
Okay, looks like we're up and running, and it is time to read a couple more pages from the Hollow Earth Enigma. So, we'll jump right on into chapter 7 and 8 tonight. I was just looking at it. It looks like we've got 11 chapters and or no, I'm sorry, 12 chapters and an epilogue. So, um, oh, and the epilogue is one page. So, I'll just tag it on to the end of 11 and 12 when we get there. So, we'll keep on the 2 chapter a night thing, and that'll take us out to the end of the book, with all of the readings being fairly even. So, all right, here we go. Chapter 7, The Secret Log of Admiral Byrd. Those who met Rear Admiral Richard Byrd described him as an archetypal all-American hero. Tall, good-looking, with blonde curly hair, a ready smile, and easy laugh. He was a man of adventure who never shirked a challenge and always talked about his achievements modestly, although he was well aware of the value of publicity in promoting his aims. As an accomplished U.S. naval officer and pilot, he was not, however, given to flights of imagination. The elements of sea and sky in which he spent most of the most formative years of his life had been demanding taskmasters. He was single-minded in all he did, inspired all those he commanded, and was precise in describing his experiences, no matter how unusual. As well as being a seaman and aviator, Byrd also became a scientific explorer, and is perhaps best remembered today for his long-distance flights over the Atlantic, his well-organized expeditions to the Antarctic, and his survival alone for one whole winter near the South Pole, all exploits that provided invaluable information for subsequent pilots and explorers. Yet this tough and resourceful man who experienced at first hand the climatic extremes to be found at the ends of the earth is another of the key figures in the Hollow Earth enigma, for the evidence suggests that Admiral Byrd flew into the inner world, quote unquote, via the poles on probably 2 occasions, and left a record of his experiences which is every bit as astonishing as that of Olaf Jansen, though told from a quite different perspective. Much of Richard Evelyn Byrd's life as an explorer is recounted in a matter-of-fact style in his 2 books, Discovery, 1935, and Alone, 1938. Yet the story of his amazing flights in the Arctic and Antarctic just a few years after the end of the Second World War remains shrouded in mystery and full of unanswered questions. The log he kept of these flights is unavailable, quote unquote. Despite repeated requests to the New York office of U.S. Naval Research, and when he died in 1957, a diary he had kept of his other strange experiences when flying over the polar territories was claimed by the U.S. Naval Intelligence Bureau in Washington, and has likewise proved unavailable to scholars or the general public. But thanks to the assistance, quote, I have received from some fellow Hollow Earth researchers in Australia. Why is that a quote? I don't know. I am able to present extracts from the crucial sections of both documents which have been secret for almost half a century. The contents, as you will read, are little short of amazing. I don't know why he's got like single quotes kind of scattered in there. I think those are just maybe typos. Bird was born in Winchester, Virginia on 25 October 1888, and after attending the University of Virginia and the U.S. Naval Academy, learned to fly at the Navy's Air Station at Pensacola in Florida. His early training flights were in seaplanes, the downfall of quite a number of young pilots, but he persevered and, once qualified, served with distinction during the First World War. Later, he played an important role in developing navigational aids for transatlantic crossings and began his polar career in 1924 when he commanded a small naval aviation detachment on an expedition to western Greenland. This fired him with an ambition to be the first man to fly over the North Pole. And on 9 May 1926, he took off in a Fokker 3-engine monoplane from Kings Bay, Spitsbergen. Thus he came to gaze on the area with which his name has become inextricably linked in Hollow Earth lore. His later description of the flight in Sky War 1928 is pregnant with inferences. And then we have a quote. Quote, "The unknown lay ahead. We were opening an unexplored region at the rate of nearly 10,000 square miles an hour, and were experiencing the incomparable satisfaction of searching for a new land. Time and direction became topsy-turvy as we neared the pole, and here and there, instead of the pressing together of the ice fields, there was a separation, leaving a water lead showing greenish blue against the white of the snow. Once for a moment I mistook a distant, vague, low-lying cloud formation for the mountain peaks of a far-away land." End quote. What in fact did Byrd see on that May day? The open water was certainly a surprise. Ooh, excuse me, yawning all of a sudden. The open water was certainly a surprise, but had he also glimpsed something beyond the pole, never seen before, but hinted at from ancient times? Whatever the facts of the matter, on his return to the United States, he became a national hero, was made a rear admiral, and awarded a U.S. Congressional Medal of Honor. But some authorities felt the climax of the flight may have been an illusion. As Richard Montague explains in Oceans, Poles, and Airmen, 1981, quote, "In the early 70s, grave doubts were cast upon these records, and indeed upon Byrd's claim to have reached the pole at all." End quote. The first hint of a conspiracy over what the aviator had seen, Byrd was Byrd, for his part, was never in any doubt about the curious phenomena he had witnessed, and they were never far from his thoughts on later polar expeditions. In the autumn of 1928, after a warm-up flight in June 1927 across the Atlantic from west to east, Byrd announced that he was planning to go to the other end of the Earth and fly over the unknown regions of the Antarctic. His fame and publicity skill enabled him to obtain financial backing from wealthy Americans like Ford and Rockefeller, and a flood of donations poured in from the public, amounting to over $400,000. Backed by these funds, he led a large and well-equipped expedition to set up a base on the face of the Ross Ice Shelf. He named it, with a patriotic flourish, Little America. Once more, the unexpected awaited Byrd when he took to the air on 29 November 1929. As he recorded in his 1931 publication Little America, Aerial Exploration in the Antarctic and the Flight to the South Pole. Quote, "It is a confusing place, this imaginary point, the South Pole. All time meridians converge there. A person unfortunate enough to be living in the vicinity would have difficulty in telling just what time to keep. Directions, as we reckon them, likewise mean nothing to this unfortunate creature, for unless he was traveling either north or south, it would be impossible for him to walk in a straight line and still retain the same direction. His direction would change noticeably every few minutes, and to keep his original direction he would be forced to follow a spiral course." End quote. As Bird flew across the bottom of the world, strange new sensations again crowded his vision. Quote, "Of all the flights I have made, none was so full of excitement and profit as this one. An air of impending drama foreshadowed every mile of progress. North, east, south, and west, everything that was there was unseen and untrodden and unknown. Dim shapes began to loom in the southeastward, suggestive of land. They were not unlike the pyramids of Egypt in the odd looming which is characteristic of Antarctic visibility. It seemed to be very important, and yet one could not exult. Nature had worked on such a large scale and with such infinite power that one could only gape at her handiwork with open mouth and say, 'Holy smoke!' For here was the Ice Age in its chill flood tide. Here was a continent throttled and overwhelmed. Here was the lifeless waste born of one of the greatest periods of refrigeration that the earth has ever known. Seeing it, one could scarcely believe that the Antarctic was once a warm and fertile climate, with its own plants and trees of respectable size." End quote. The Rear Admiral and his navigator, Lloyd G. Grenly, made several other flights over the Antarctic continent that winter, discovering a range of high peaks that were named Rockefeller Mountains after the expedition's benefactor, and a large tract of territory which was designated Mary Bird Land after the pilot's wife. They also apparently undertook a second journey in the vicinity of the South Pole, although this is not specifically mentioned in Bird's book. The evidence of the flight is to be found in F.A. Giannini's book, World Beyond the Poles, 1959, in which he cites the evidence of a newsreel. Man, I just can't quit yawning tonight. Sorry about that. Okay, quote, "That year, 1929, a newsreel could be seen in America's cinemas which described both flights. It also showed newspaper photographs of the land beyond the pole with its mountains, trees, rivers, and a large animal identified as a mammoth. Today, this newsreel apparently does not exist, although hundreds of people remember viewing it. They saw things recorded on that film which proved that this unknown, uncharted, and presently denied land exists." End quote. Giannini maintained that Lloyd Grenly had confirmed these facts to one of his neighbors in Nelsonville, Wisconsin, some years before his death in June of 1970. The author said that the existence of the newsreel had also been confirmed to him in a number of letters from people who had seen it, including one which he quoted from Miss Dorothy E. Graffin of New York. Quote, "R.E. Admiral Byrd's flights to the South Pole and what he saw in the interior of the earth at the South Pole. Nobody ever mentions the documentary film which Byrd took on this flight and was shown in motion picture theaters throughout the United States soon after Byrd's return home. My sister and I saw this in White Plains, New York. Byrd narrated the film himself and exclaimed in wonder as he approached a warm water lake surrounded by conifers, with a large animal moving among the trees, and what Byrd described as a mountain of coal sparkling with diamonds." End quote. Notwithstanding the mystery surrounding this flight, there is no doubt that Byrd returned to Little America for a second time in 1933 to explore and map new territory. Between March and August 1934, he also spent 5 months alone in a hut at a weather station, Bowling Advance Base, some 125 miles from Little America. Here he endured temperatures as low as negative 76 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 60 degrees centigrade, and was finally rescued suffering from frostbite and carbon monoxide poisoning that came perilously close to taking his life. Alone, 1938 describes these events in harrowing detail. Courageous as this exploit was, even weirder events awaited the intrepid adventurer after the Second World War. During the hostilities, Byrd had served in the rather less demanding position of a member of the staff of the Chief of Naval Operations. Then in 1946, he was put in charge of a new program named Operation High Jump, ostensibly to continue mapping the North and South Poles, although, as Nigel Pennick has suggested, he may also have been asked to investigate the possibility of any Nazi presence. In February 1947, before leaving for the Arctic, he again talked to the press about his plans and was quoted as saying, "I'd like to see that land beyond the North Pole. That area beyond the pole is the center of the great unknown." Quote unquote. According to the official U.S. sources, during his subsequent 7-hour flight, his 7-hour flight across the Arctic, Byrd flew a distance of 1,700 miles and returned with much useful data, end quote. Yet why is there no more specific information available about this flight, which was clearly another milestone in polar exploration? And stranger still, why did Byrd, who had set out with such high expectations of seeing, quote, the center of the great unknown, end quote, never speak about the journey for the rest of his life? If we accept as authentic a copy of the Rear Admiral's log, which has been obtained by the Hollow Earth Society of Australia, then his wish to see the land beyond the pole did come true. The document is a lengthy one which has clearly been annotated, but the extracts, quote, I have included below do seem to bear the hallmarks of Richard Byrd's style of writing and manner of expression. It is for the reader to judge whether they could be genuine or not. End quote. Um, okay, and then there is a quote of the flight log itself. Okay, so quote, flight log, Camp Arctic, February 19th, 1947. Vast ice and snow below. Note coloration of a yellowish nature. It is dispersed in a linear pattern. Altering course for a better examination of this color pattern below. A reddish-purple color also. Circle this area 2 full turns and return to a sign compass heading. Position check made again with base, relaying information concerning coloration in ice and snow below. End quote. Both magnetic and gyro compasses began to gyrate and wobble. Oh, I guess this is more of the log, sorry. It's hard to tell. Some of his quotes are a little bit difficult to tell. This is a very long bunch of quotes. It takes up a full page. Okay, so continuing the quote. Both magnetic and gyro compasses began to gyrate and wobble. We are unable to hold our heading by instrumentation. Take a bearing with sun compass, but all seems well. The controls are seemingly slow to respond, have a sluggish quality, yet there is no indication of icing. In the distance is what appears to be mountains, 29 minutes of elapsed flight time and first sighting of mountains. It is no illusion. They are mountains consisting of a small range I have never seen before. Altitude changed to 2,950 feet. Encountering strong turbulence again, we are crossing over the small mountain range, still proceeding northward as best as can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a small river, a valley with a small river running through the central portion. There should be no green valley here. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. From the port side, there are great forests growing on the mountainside. The instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. I alter the altitude to 1400 feet and execute a sharp left turn to better examine the valley below. It is green with either moss or a tight-knit type of grass. The light here seems different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn and spot what seems to be a large animal of some kind below. Appears to be an elephant. No, it looks more like a mammoth-like animal. This is incredible, but there it is. Decrease altitude to 1,000 feet and take binoculars to better examine the animal. Definitely a mammoth-like animal. Report this to base camp. Encountering more rolling green hills, the external temperature indicator reads 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Continue on our heading. Navigation instruments seem normal now. I am puzzled over their actions. Attempt to contact base camp. Radio is not functioning. The countryside is more level than normal. If I may say the word. Ahead we spot what seems like habitations. This is impossible. Aircraft seems light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. I tugged at the controls again. They will not respond. The engines of our craft have stopped running. The landing process is beginning. The downward motion is negligible and we touch down with only a slight jolt. I am making a hasty last entry in the flight log. I do not know what is going to happen now. End quote, finally. Um, is this a true account or merely a version attributed to Byrd? Hollow Earth researchers who have studied the log are divided. Some believe it does indeed record a journey beyond the pole and in through the polar opening to the hollow earth of mountains, lakes, rivers, vegetation, and life forms as legend has maintained. Others, however, are rather more suspicious of the document because of a section in it which reports that after the landing, Byrd met a group of tall blond men who spoke English in a slightly Nordic or German accent and greeted him with the words, "Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. You are in safe hands." After this, he traveled in a strange disc-shaped machine with quote, with markings like a type of swastika, end quote, and was given a conducted tour of the inner world, visiting, quote, a glowing city which appeared to be made of crystal, end quote. Later, Byrd was allowed back to his aircraft and told to take a message to all surface dwellers about the dangers they faced if they continued to experiment with atomic weapons. To those researchers who were aware of the stories of Nazis and secret polar bases, the whole incident seemed to be rather too much of a coincidence to be true. The document does, however, contain one further entry from 11 March 1947, which is much more likely to have been made by Byrd. Quote, I have just attended a briefing and passed on my log. I am now detained for several hours and interviewed by the military and a medical team. It was an ordeal. I am placed under strict control of the international security provisions of the United States of America. I am ordered to remain silent in regard to all that I have seen. Incredible. I am reminded that I am a military man, that I must obey orders. End quote. In 1955, Byrd was again, quote, under orders, end quote, to return to the South Pole and continue mapping the territory. Despite the restrictions which had been placed upon him, the Rear Admiral spoke to the press before sailing to the Antarctic in the aircraft carrier Philippine Sea. In November 1955, telling reporters, quote, this is the most important expedition in the history of the world, end quote. Yet once again, the official statement after the assignment was over was blunt to the point of banality. Quote, Rear Admiral Byrd made a second flight over the South Pole and took part in several other flights. A total of 437,000 square miles of Antarctic territory was discovered and mapped, end quote. This communique completely ignores a much more revealing radio announcement issued from Little America on 14 January 1956 and later reprinted in many national daily newspapers in America and elsewhere. On January 13, members of the United States expedition accomplished a flight of 2,700 miles from the base at McMurdo Sound, which is 400 miles west of the South Pole, and penetrated a land extent of 2,300 miles beyond the pole, end quote. A quick look at a map of the world will immediately reveal the discrepancy in this report. The Antarctic is, of course, surrounded by water, and it is impossible to travel a distance of 2,300 miles in any direction without traversing water. So, where could this land over 2,000 miles away be but inside the hollow Earth? In public, at least, Byrd was circumspect when he returned from the South Pole on 13 March to be greeted as, quote, the world's greatest explorer, end quote. The expedition had, he said, quote, opened up a vast new territory, end quote. And he spoke lyrically of, quote, that enhanced continent in the sky, land of everlasting mystery, end quote. Yet almost as quickly as the interest in Byrd's discoveries had grown, so it seemed to dissipate, with the newspapers, radios, and newsreels turning to other items of news closer to home. If the Rear Admiral had discovered an inner world which could change forever mankind's perception of the Earth, the media, it seemed, was too preoccupied to take any more notice. Or was it? Dr. Raymond Bernard, in his pamphlet The Hollow Earth, 1969, thinks the explanation is rather different. Quote, Admiral Byrd's discovery is today a leading international top secret, and it has been so since it was first made in 1947. After Byrd made his radio announcement from his plane and after a brief press notice, all subsequent news on the subject was carefully suppressed by government agencies. The explanation is evident. If Admiral Byrd made such a momentous discovery, and undoubtedly the greatest one in history, of a new unknown land area of undetermined extent over which his expedition flew for a total of 4,000 miles at each pole, and each area is probably as wide as it is long, and since Byrd turned back before reaching its end, is probably much larger than an area 4,000 miles square, then it would be in the interest of the U.S. government to keep this discovery secret so that other nations do not learn about it and claim this territory for themselves. End quote. Victim of a conspiracy theory or not, Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd finished his career weighed down with medals and citations for his expeditions and his exemplary conduct. When he died in Boston on 11 March 1957, the authorities honored him as a national hero, and he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Virginia, with full military honors. But to the grave with him went the secrets of precisely what he had seen while flying over the poles. A final paragraph in his diary does not answer all the questions, but certainly indicates that Byrd believed there was more to the Arctic and Antarctic wastes than just endless miles of frozen snow. Quote, December 24, 1956. These last few years since 1947 have not been so kind. I now make my final entry in this singular diary. In closing, I must state that I have faithfully kept this matter secret as directed all these years. It has been completely against my values and moral rights. Now I seem to sense a long night coming on, and this secret will not die with me, but as truth it shall triumph. It is the only hope for all mankind. I have seen it, and it has quickened my spirit and set me free. I have done my duty towards the monstrous military-industrial complex. Now the long night of the Arctic ends. The brilliant sunshine of truth shall come again, and those who are of darkness shall fail in flight. For I have seen that land beyond the poles, the center of the great unknown. End quote. Underneath is scrawled the familiar signature, Richard E. Byrd, United States Navy. And that is the end of that chapter. So the next one is a little bit shorter than that. Um, so we'll just jump straight on into it. I've hardly had any water, so I think I'll make it through. Hey Vesper, how you doing tonight? We were just reading about Rear Admiral Byrd's flights over the Antarctic. I'm not sure how long you've been in. I didn't notice. So, anyway, um, Chapter 8, Holes in the Top of the World. Among the most revealing pieces of evidence in the hollow Earth enigma are four photographs of the North Pole, all taken from space. They show a circular opening where the polar ice cap should be. Three of these were shot in 1967 and 1968 by orbiting satellites, and the fourth in April 1972, apparently by Apollo 16 on its journey to the moon. All have been the subject of considerable controversy and speculation. Do they actually reveal the entranceway to the inner Earth, or are they just photographs of freak weather conditions? Because they may be important pieces of evidence, copies of two of the most impressive photographs appear in the plate section of this book. The first two pictures were taken in January and November of 1967 by satellite cameras. On 6 January, a circling U.S. Environmental Science Service Administration weather satellite, ESSA 3, nearing the end of its tour of duty, having taken almost 1.5 million photographs, produced a shot of the North Pole in which, instead of the normal mass of white clouds, a black, indistinct mass obscured the whole region. Later in the year, on 18 November, an ATS-3 satellite camera with a vantage point from the equator captured on film what seemed like a huge dark crater where the Arctic Circle was normally to be seen. Curious as both pictures were, they excited no real interest among the ESSA officials in Washington, D.C., who filed them along with millions of other exposures. It was not until a third and much more detailed photograph of the Arctic region was taken that anyone began to believe something extraordinary had occurred. This third exposure was again just one of a huge batch of radio-received exposures transmitted from an ESSA-7 satellite on 23 November 1968. As it circled the world filming the changing weather conditions, during its 481 days in space, the ESSA-7 took a total of 39,953 pictures before being put on standby mode. The administration records indicate. The other photographs taken by the satellite all show the usual patterns of swirling clouds over the vast land masses and oceans of the world, but this anomaly, so it is believed, caught a moment when the normally dense weather system over the North Pole cleared briefly to allow the camera in the sky a view of the legendary gateway to the hollow Earth. For 2 years, this remarkable photograph went unnoticed until it was spotted by a researcher and, thanks to the Freedom of Information policy of ESSA, released for publication. Not surprisingly, the first appearance of the picture in the June 1970 issue of Flying Saucers magazine created a sensation. It was also something of a coup for the publication's editor, Ray Palmer, who had for years been championing a number of controversial science subjects, including alien intervention, UFOs, and the Hollow Earth. Palmer, who died in 1977, is still regarded as one of the most important figures during the period of the late 40s, when interest first began to develop in what are popularly referred to as flying saucers. He was a man of strong opinions, never afraid of controversies, and always willing to defend himself feistily when accused, as he was on several occasions, of masterminding a, a hoax to sell his books or magazines. He was in many respects in the same mold as the current wave of writers on the unexplained, such as Eric von Daniken, Charles Berlitz, and Graham Hancock. Palmer's resolute stand against those who attacked him or ridiculed his beliefs was all the more commendable because of his diminutive stature and poor health. Raymond Arthur Palmer, Rapp to his friends, was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on 1 August 1910 and suffered a childhood plague childhood plagued by accidents and illness. He broke his back in a car accident at the age of 7, fell off a roof at 10, and by the time he reached adulthood stood at just 4 feet 8 inches tall. Confined to bed for several of his formative years, Ray found escape in the world of science fiction, filling his imagination with the novels of Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and Edgar Rice Burroughs, uh, as well as the first magazine to cater for this growing interest, Amazing Stories. The ideas that all these works put into his mind left him in doubt about where his future lay. In 1930, he published the first science fiction fanzine in America, The Comet, and soon afterwards began contributing to Amazing Stories and its rivals, Astounding Stories and Wonder Stories. His reputation grew rapidly, and in February 1938 he was offered the job of editor of the Chicago-based magazine that had inspired his fascination, Amazing Stories. It was in this editorial chair that Ray Palmer was to make his name, first by continuing to publish Edgar Rice Burroughs, and second by printing Marooned Off Vesta, the debut story of the legendary Isaac Asimov. More significantly, he was fascinated by the unexplained, as presented in Charles Fort's works, and he used his position to look for answers to some of the strangest cases. Believing, for instance, that Jesse James was still alive, he sent the great detective John Shevlin to track down the outlaw, and when the pilot Kenneth Arnold coined the term flying saucers to describe some unidentified objects he saw in the sky, it was Palmer who in 1952 co-authored his groundbreaking book, The Coming of the Saucers. This just 2 years after an accidental fall had left him paralyzed from the waist down in a condition the doctors had wrongly diagnosed as permanent. He turned this to his own advantage by telling a story that when people met him for the first time, they would almost invariably exclaim, "Oh, you really are the man from Mars," quote unquote. Although Palmer was once very publicly accused by a U.S. Air Force spokesman of having generated the entire UFO mystery as a publicity campaign, he was quick to point out that he did not actually believe in the popular concept of flying saucers. Quote, "I really don't believe in them," end quote, he told Saga magazine in 1965. Quote, "At least not in the popular concept of flying saucers that the public interprets as being synonymous with alien spacecraft from outer space. I do believe in whatever reality is behind the flying saucer mystery, but this reality is at the present time unknown," end quote. In 1949, Palmer resigned as editor of Amazing Stories and returned to his native Wisconsin to start his own publishing house. Here at Amherst, he converted an old school building into the headquarters of a group of magazines whose titles clearly indicate their contents. Fate, which continued the same line of inquiry into inexplicable phenomena that Charles Fort had instigated. Search, Space World, and Rocket World, all dealing with the future of space travel and the possibility of alien life forms, and Flying Saucers, in which he campaigned for more civilian flying saucer research and often confounded and irritated the scientific establishment with his claims. Few of these topics generated more heat than the case of the quote-unquote hole in the top of the world. Palmer was unable to accept the extraterrestrial origin of UFOs and was inclined to believe that they might come from much nearer home. In 1968, he wrote an editorial for Flying Saucers in which he put his belief into words. Quote, "The more we consider the extraterrestrial thesis, the more impossible it becomes to prove. UFOs have been seen in the skies since man's prehistory, and today there seems to be a virtual traffic jam of objects coming in from nowhere." I'm sorry, I said nowhere, and it actually says from somewhere. It seems to me difficult to conceive that ours should be the only planet of any interest to extraterrestrial life forms. Therefore, the supposition that the saucers have an Earth base and may be manned by an older terrestrial race brings the cosmic concept down to reality. Geographically speaking, of course, our own atmosphere is a great deal closer than Alpha Centauri. End quote. It seemed to Palmer that there might be some connection between these UFOs and the ancient legend of a hollow Earth, which he had read about in a number of publications. In another article that same year, he mentioned the way his mind was working. Quote, I cannot deny the possible existence of underground cultures. One can find references to them in the most primitive oral traditions and right up to contemporary accounts. End quote. If Raymond Palmer was hoping to further evidence to support the idea of a world beneath the surface of the Earth, he could hardly have expected anything quite like the ESS. Man, that one hit me hard. Sorry about that. He, he could hardly have expected anything quite like the ESS A7 photograph which landed on his desk. Unknown to him, of course, the picture had been in existence since 1968, but it had taken a sharp-eyed UFO researcher in Washington to spot the dark circular area at the North Pole and send a copy to Palmer. The correspondent also enclosed a comparative photograph of the polar regions swathed in clouds, which had been taken on the same day. The writer added that the unique picture was completely unretouched. The grid patterns of latitudes to be seen on it had been printed automatically by computer calculations when the picture was taken. He said and formed an integral part of the photograph, enabling the Environmental Science Service officials to identify precisely the areas shown. The area depicted is about 40% of the Earth's surface and clearly shows part of the North American continent, Greenland, and some of the Asian continent. Confirming with Washington that the photograph was genuine, Palmer wasted no time in publishing it on the front cover of the June 1970 issue of Flying Saucers. Inside, in an editorial, he declared his unequivocal belief in the picture. Quote, one of the severest criticisms leveled at us during past years because of our theorizing concerning a hole at the pole and a hollow Earth has been the fact that none of the photos taken from satellites have shown such a hole. There have been a half dozen taken from orbits which have shown the dark area visible in the photo, but they were impossible to record as definitive photographic resolution of such a phenomena as a hole. Now we have a photo. Quote, end quote. I thought he said, quote, that they were photos and then. What? So I'm a little confused, sorry. So he said that no photos had been taken from satellites. There have been a half dozen taken from orbits which have shown the dark area visible in the photo. And I'm a little confused by that quote because he says there's half a dozen, and now he says now we have a photo. So I'm a little confused by that. But sorry, that's just maybe me being dense. Palmer forestalled any accusations that it was asking too much to make such a claim, based on a single photograph, which could have resulted from a defect in the camera or its lens, by specifically citing the ESSA 3 and ATS 3 photographs, which his researcher in Washington had also uncovered meanwhile. Underneath these two pictures, which unfortunately did not reproduce anywhere near as well as the ESSA 7 photograph, he declared forcibly, quote, if UFOs have been in the top secret file, then the place they might come from certainly would be. And apart from flying saucers, there are many more reasons why a hole in the pole would be classified information. Militarily, it would be highly significant, particularly if the inside of the Earth is inhabited, perhaps by a race far superior to us scientifically and technologically. More modern concepts of the formation of planets adopt the vortex or whirlpool theory. This states that bodies in space are formed by a rotating motion in the ether which collects matter at its center, gradually adding to it until it becomes a sun or planet or a satellite or a comet. The semi-spherical object has the typical formation of a vortex, such as you observe in water going down a drain with a hole at the center of a swirl. Thus, in this theory, quite widely held by astronomers and physicists, many planetary bodies still have this hole at the center of the whirl which has formed them. End quote. The opinions that greeted the publications of the photographs in Palmer's editorial were, as might be expected, poles apart. The cynical asked why, as several airlines advertised the fact that they flew over the North Pole every day, this so-called hole had not been seen many times before. In fact, polar flights are rarely within 150 miles of the geographic pole because of possible interference to the navigational instruments. Other readers found it difficult to believe that the cloud cover was so constantly dense as to produce only a couple of pictures amongst all the millions taken at the time, and demanded more data. But for the believers, especially men like the respected British UFO author Brinsley Lepore Trench, the ESSA 7 shot was a major piece of evidence in the enigma of the hollow Earth. Lepore Trench, 1911 to 1995, who was actually the 8th Earl of Clancarty and chairman of the all-party UFO study group in the House of Lords, had himself been investigating the possible terrestrial origins of UFOs, as his books The Flying Saucer Story 1966 and Operation Earth 1969 bear witness. Greatly excited by the ESSA photograph, he told the London newspaper The Sunday Times in October 1974, quote, "It is one of the most exciting and remarkable photographs ever taken, clearly showing the North Polar entrance which mankind has been seeking since time immemorial." End quote. Some writers to flying saucers were less complimentary. One correspondent claimed the photograph was a composite paste-up placed over a sphere for reproduction, end quote, which Palmer denied and ESA confirmed was not the case, while another who said he was a radioscope operator in the Arctic region wrote that a number of government scientific specialists had traveled all over the Arctic, quote, without seeing any evidence of the pole, end quote. Palmer again was quick to take up his pen in defense of the photograph, as well as to widen his argument. Quote, "Recently, the most fascinating discovery of the polar area has been the revelation that as we approach the pole, the surface of the ocean begins to slant towards the north. Now, every high school student knows that the absolutely infallible way to find a level and construct something on that level is to use the surface of water, which never tilts. Now, why 800 miles from the pole does the water suddenly begin to tilt in that direction? Obviously, gravity has something to do with it. Either gravity is no longer functioning directly toward the center of the Earth, or the center of the mass is being dislocated by the fact of an increasing angle of descent into a depression, the surface of which is at right angles to this displacement of the center of gravity of the Earth's mass. Lots of strange things happen in the polar regions, as explorers have described, like the distance to the east-west horizon being greater than the distance to the north-south horizon, which so baffled Nansen, and it would take a very thick book to present all the facts that are not explainable without postulating some such thing as a hole at the pole or a hollow Earth." End quote. Palmer then threw down a challenge. It doesn't say it's a quote, but it looks like a quote, so I'm going to say this is it, that it is. Quote, "I had a very good reason for publishing the photographs in my magazine. There is not a person in this world who has ever read any of my publications who can say I have ever fooled or tricked them. I have given you the chance to see for yourself, decide for yourselves, refute or support me if you can." End quote. It actually does have the end quotation, but not the beginning one. So, typos. That's just the way it is. The fourth and most recent photograph of the hole at the North Pole is rather more problematic, although potentially it offers the most exciting confirmation of the hollow Earth theory. The source and the date when it was taken are less certain, excuse me, than those of 1967 and 1968, but it has been widely disseminated and discussed on the internet during the past few years. The most generally held view is that the picture was taken by the Apollo 16 spacecraft shortly after its launch on 20 April 1972. This moon mission was completed on 27 April when this spacecraft and crew safely splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. A huge selection of photographs taken by the spacecraft and its crew were subsequently made available to the media, but it was not until several years later that the image in question was spotted among the batch. It showed a full view of planet Earth with close to the top of a circular opening amidst the cloud cover of the North Pole. The picture had been processed at the Goddard Flight Center in New Mexico, but not released to the NASA Photographic Library until the mid-70s. Why this delay occurred can now only be a matter of conjecture. However, because all NASA material is designated in the public domain, it was at once available for publication and was soon being reprinted and discussed in several small circulation American and Australian publications devoted to Fortean topics. Despite this, the existence of the photograph was not generally realized until it was posted on a website, Space Images, in 1996. Since that date, the site has attracted many hundreds of curious visitors, not to mention a continuing debate about the picture's authenticity or otherwise. The photograph has also been computer enlarged and enhanced around the area of the North Pole, and the copy included in this book is one of the largest available. It shows what appears to be a completely snow-free landmass just inside the rim of the hole, only partly obscured by clouds are what are believed to be waves breaking around the entranceway. One American Hollow Earth researcher has commented on the fact that the hole seems to be an almost perfect circle, and he wonders if the particular disbursement of the clouds across it indicates that there is a warm atmosphere just below, as has so often been suggested. Naturally, what all the visitors to the Space Images site really want to know is this: if the photograph is genuine, why is such a great discovery being kept secret? Jan Lamprecht, who has written literally thousands of words on the Hollow Earth, is in no doubt. Quote, I have long held the opinion, and many will hate me for saying this, but ufology is going nowhere. People are rushing down the wrong path, watching Area 51, chasing reptilians, looking at crop circles, and trying to catch cattle mutilators. No big cover-up is needed because people are already looking in the wrong place for the wrong thing. Back in the early days, researchers and the U.S. government were on even ground, but the government's successful silencing campaign has made the need for silencing less and less today. The fact is, the Earth is hollow, and an advanced civilization may be on our doorstep. The few who dare go against the grain and believe this are the only ones the government are really interested in. They are the only people who actually stand a chance of upsetting the cart. I have no doubt that as one gets closer to the truth, the U.S. government will begin to play rough. End quote. Although I cannot altogether describe to Jan Lamprecht's rather alarmist view, subscribe, to Jan Lamprecht's rather alarmist views, I do believe there is evidence to support his contention, and that of a number of other researchers, including, of course, Ray Palmer and Brinsley Trench, that UFOs originate from inside the Earth. The evidence that I have assembled of sightings from both the North and South Poles also points to this conclusion. And that is the end of that second chapter. So that will take us into chapter 9 for next time. This one is titled UFOs from the Hollow Earth 1, the Antarctic. So we'll leave it off there. We'll see who's around to raid. Well, Mr. Blitzer's around, so let's go on over there. So if you'll bear with me a minute or two, I'll take us on over there and we'll see what he's up to.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love.